Get to Old Navy today for a deal you won't want to miss. Today and tomorrow only, get boys and girls polos for just $3. Yep, boys and girls polos, just $3 at Old Navy and OldNavy.com. Valid 7/14 to 7/15. Select styles, limit 5.
Welcome back to part 1 of the Indian Mutiny, the brief history podcast. Please listen to part 1 as part 2 won't make much sense. We will have a brief recap and a timeline just to get you back up to speed. As always, any new podcast relies on the generosity of his listeners. Please share, tell your friends. Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook. That's facebook.com/brief history podcast, and on Twitter @bhistorypodcast. Like, share, follow, tell your friends. All these details will be in the podcast notes. Please look out for them. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 began as a mutiny of sepoys of the East Indian Company's army on the 10th of May 1857 in the town of Meerut, and soon escalated into other mutinies and civilian rebellions, largely in the upper Gangetic plain of central India, with major hostilities confined to present-day Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and the South Madhya Pradesh and the Delhi region. The rebellion posed a considerable threat to company power in that region and was soon contained with the fall of Gwalior on the 20th of June 1858. The rebellion is also known as India's First War of Independence, the Great Rebellion, the Indian Mutiny, the Revolt of 1857, the Uprising of 1857, the Sepoy Rebellion, and the Sepoy Mutiny. The mutiny was a result of various grievances. However, the flashpoint was reached when the soldiers were asked to bite off paper cartridges for their rifle, which were greased with animal fat, namely beef and pork. This was and is against the religious beliefs of Hindus and Muslims alike. Other regions of the company-controlled India, such as Bengal, Bombay, and Madras Presidency, soon remained largely calm. In the Punjab, the Sikh princes backed the company, providing soldiers and support. The largely princely states of Hyderabad, Mysore, Travancore, and Kashmir, as well as smaller ones of Rajputana, did not join the rebellion. In some regions, such as Uttar, the rebellion took on the attributes of a patriotic revolt against the European presence. Maratha leaders such as Lakshmanbai, the Rani of Jhansi, became folk heroes in the nationalist movement in India half a century later. However, they themselves generated no coherent ideology for the new order. The rebellion led to the dissolution of the East Indian Company in 1858. It also led to the British to recognise the army, the financial system and administration in India, recognise that they needed to reorder and recast the army in a number of different ways. India was therefore directly governed by the Crown as a new British Raj. March 1857 saw the mutiny at Berhampur. May 10th, mutiny at Meerut. The 11th, mutineers advanced on Delhi. May 30th, open mutinies across the country. June 4th, Benares Mutiny. June 5th, Kanpur Mutiny. June 8th, Battle of Bada Ki Sirah. June 27th, Kanpur Massacre. July the 10th, Havelock Mobile column of 1,000 troops advances on Kanpur. June 15, Havelock's column fights 2 battles close to Kanpur at Agun and the Pandu Nandi and wins both. 1857, women and children are massacred at Kanpur. July 16, Nicholas's common marches on Delhi. July 25th, Havelock marches on Lucknow. July 29th, Battle of Una, Belshmaji. August 5th, Second Battle of Bushwanjani. August 12th, Battle of Baraka Kashaki. August 16th, Battle of Bindar. August 25th, Battle of Najagar. September 14th, Assault on Delhi. September 16th, Columns take Delhi. September 21st, Emperor and princes are captured and officially surrender. September 23rd, Battle of Alambar. September 24th, Battle of Balashar. September 25th, first relief of Lucknow. November 16th, Battle of Newar. September 25th, campaign ends with the capture of the fort of Durrani. March 21st, Lucknow completely recaptured. May 1st, services of Thanksgiving are held throughout the kingdom. In June, sepoys under General Wheeler in Kanpur, present-day Kanpur, rebelled and besieged European encampments. Wheeler was not only a veteran and respected soldier, but also married to a high-caste Indian lady. He had relied on his own prestige and his cordial relations with Nana Sahib to thwart rebellion, and took comparatively few measures to prepare for fortifications, and lay in supplies and administration. The besiege endured 3 weeks of the siege of Kanpur with little water or food, suffering continuous casualties to men, women and children. On the 25th of June, Nana Shahab soon made an offer of safe passage to Allahabad. With barely 3 days' food rations remaining, the British agreed, provided they could keep their small arms, and that the evacuation should take place in daylight on the morning of the 27th. The Nana Shahab wanted the evacuation to take place on the night of the 26th. Early in the morning of the 27th, the European party left their entrancement and made their way to the river, where boats provided by the Nana Shahab was waiting to take them to Allahabad. Several sepoys who had stayed loyal to the company were removed by the mutineers and killed, either because of their loyalty or because they had become Christian. A few injured British officers trading the column were also apparently hacked to death by the angry sepoys. After the European party had largely arrived at the dock, which was surrounded by sepoys positioned on both banks of the Ganges with clear lines of fire, firing broke out and the boats were abandoned by their crew and caught or were set on fire using pieces of red-hot charcoal. The British party tried to push the boats off, but all except 3 remained stuck. One boat, with over a dozen wounded men, initially escaped but was later grounded, was caught by mutineers and pushed back down the river towards the carnage at Kanpur. Towards the end, rebel cavalry rode into the river to finish off any survivors. After the firing ceased, the survivors were rounded up and the men shot. By the time the massacre was over, most of the male members of the party were dead, while the surviving women and children were removed and held hostage. They were later killed in the Buhagi massacre. Only 4 men eventually escaped alive from Kanpur on one of the boats. 2 private soldiers, both of whom died later during the rebellion, a lieutenant and Captain Mowbray Thompson, who wrote a first-hand account of the experience entitled The Story of Kanpur, London 1859. Whether the firing was planned or accidental remains unresolved. Most early histories assume it was planned either by Nana Shahab, as proposed by K. Mansour, or that Tatya Tope and Brigadier Gwalior Pasha planned it without the Nana Shahab's knowledge, proposed by G.W. Forrest. The stated reasons for the planned nature are the speed at which the Nana Shahab agreed to the British conditions, put forward by Mowbray and Thompson himself, and the firepower arranged around the gap, which were far in excess of which was necessary to guard the European troops. Most histories agree on this. During their trial, Tatya Tope denied the existence of any such plan and described the incitement of the following terms. The Europeans had already boarded the boats, and he, Taniato, raised his right hand to signal their departure. That very moment, someone from the crowd blew a loud bugle, which created disorder. In the ongoing bewilderment, the boatmen jumped off the boats. The rebels started shooting indiscriminately. Nana Shihab, who was staying in Savadej bungalow nearby, was informed of what was happening and immediately came to stop it. Some British histories allow that it might well have been a result of an accident or error. Someone accidentally or maliciously fired a shot. The panic-stricken British opened fire, and it became impossible to stop the massacre. Surviving women and children were taken to Nana Shihab and then confined first to the Savada County and then to the home of the local magistrate clerk, where they were joined by refugees from Fatehurg. Overall, 5 men and 206 women and children were confined to the Burgra for about 2 weeks. In 1 week, 25 were brought out dead due to dysentery and cholera. Meanwhile, a company relief force that had been advanced from Allahabad defeated the Indians. By the 15th of July, it was clear that Nana Shihab would not be able to hold Kanpur, and the decision was made by Nana Shihab and other leading rebels that the hostages must be killed. After the Sepoys refused to carry out this order, 2 Muslim butchers, 2 Hindu peasants and one of Nana's bodyguards went into the Burhurgi. Armed with knives and hatchets, they murdered the women and children. After the massacre, the walls were covered in blood handprints and the floor littered with fragments of human limbs. The dead and dying were thrown down a nearby well, where the well was not full. The 50-foot deep wall was filled with the remains to within 6 feet to the top, and the remainder were thrown into the Ganges. Historians have given many reasons for this act of cruelty, with company forces approaching Kanpur and soon believing that they would not advance if there was no hostages to stay. Their murders were ordered, or perhaps it was to ensure that no information was leaked after the fall of Kanpur. Other historians have suggested that killing was an attempt to undermine the Nana Shihab's relationship with the British. Perhaps it was due to fear of being recognised by some of the prisoners for having taken part in the earlier firings. The killing of the women and children proved to be a mistake. The British public were agog, and anti-imperial and pro-Indian proponents lost all their support. Kanpur became a war cry for the British and their allies for the rest of the conflict. Nana Shihab disappeared near the end of the rebellion. It was not known what had happened to him. Other British accounts state that indiscriminate punitive measures were taken in early June, 2 weeks before the murder at Mahanigar, after those of both Mirsha and Dali, specifically by Lieutenant Colonel George Smith Neal of the Madras Fusiliers, which was a European unit commanded at Allahabad while moving towards Kanpur. At the nearby town of Fetva, a mob attacked and murdered the local European population. On this pretext, Neil ordered all villages beside the Grand Trunk Road to be burned and their inhabitants hanged. Neil's methods were, quote, ruthless and horrible, end quote, and far from intimidating the population, may well have induced previously undecided sepoys and communities to revolt. Neil was killed in action at Lucknow on the 26th of September and was never called to account for his punitive measures, though contemporary British sources lionised him and his gallant blue caps. When the British retook Kanpur, the soldiers took their sepoys prisoners to the Birangi and forced them to lick the bloodstains from the walls and floor. They then hanged or blew from the cannons, which was the traditional Mughal punishment for mutiny, the majority of the sepoy prisoners. Although some claim the sepoys took no actual part in the killings themselves, they did not act to stop it, and that was acknowledged by Captain Thompson after the British departed Kanpur for a second time. Very soon after the events in Meerut, rebellion erupted in the state of Awadh, also known as Hodor, in modern-day Uttar Pradesh, which had been annexed barely a year before. The British Commissioner resident at Lucknow, Sir Henry Lawrence, had enough time to fortify his position inside the residency compound. The company forces numbered some 1,700 men, including local sepoys. The rebels' assaults were unsuccessful, and they began to barrage all artillery and musket fire into the compound. Lawrence was one of the first casualties. The rebels tried to besiege the walls with explosives and bypass them via underground tunnels that led to underground close combat. After 90 days of siege, numbers of company forces reduced to 300 loyal sepoys, 350 British soldiers, and 550 non-combatants. On September the 25th, a relief column under command of Sir Henry Havelock and accompanied by Sir James Outram, with whom in theory was his superior, fought its way from Cawnpore to Lucknow in a brief campaign in which the numerically small column defeated rebel forces in a series of increasingly large battles. This became known as the First Release of Lucknow, and if this force was not strong enough to break the siege or extricate themselves, and then soon was forced to join the garrison. In October, another larger force, army under the new Commander-in-Chief Sir Colin Campbell, was finally able to relieve the garrison, and on the 18th of November they evacuated the defended enclave within the city, the women and children leaving first. They then conducted an orderly withdrawal to Cawnpore, and where they defeated an attempt by Tavita to recapture the city in the Second Battle of Cawnpore. Early in 1858, Campbell once again advanced on Lucknow with a large army, though this time seeking to suppress the rebellion in Adwa. He was aided by a large Nepalese contingent advancing from north under Jang Bahadur, and was decided to side with the company in December 1857. Campbell's advance was slow and methodical, and drove the large but disorganised rebel army from Lucknow with few casualties of his own. Nevertheless, this allowed large numbers of rebels to disperse into Adwa, and Campbell was forced to spend the summer and autumn dealing with scattered pockets of resistance while losing men to the heat, disease and guerrilla actions. The Central Indian Campaign of 1858. Jhansi was an Maharashi ruler which ruled princely state of Balatka. When the Rajaj of Jhansi died without a biblical male heir in 1853, it was annexed to the British Raj by the Governor-General of India under doctrine of lapse. His widow, Rani Lakshmi Bai, protested against the denial of the rights of their adopted son. When war broke out, Jhansi quickly became a centre of rebellion. A small group of company officials and their families took refuge in Jhansi's fort, and the Rani negotiated their evacuation. However, they were left the fort, they were massacred by the rebels, over which the Rani had no control. The Europeans suspected Rani of complicity, despite her repeated denials. By the end of 1857, the company had lost control of much of Bakanda and eastern Rajasthan. The Bengal army units in the area, however, rebelled, massacred, or marched to take part in the battles for Delhi and Cawnpore. The many princely states which made up this area began warring against themselves. In September and October 1857, the Rani led the successful defence of Jhansi against the invading armies of the neighbouring Rajajes of Datia and Orchia. On the 3rd of February, Rose broke the 3-month siege of Sangor. Thousands of local villagers welcomed him as a liberator, freeing them from rebel occupation. In March 1858, the Central Indian Field Force led by Sir Hugh Rose advanced on the laid siege of Jhansi. The company forces captured the city, but the Rani fled in disguise. After being driven from Jhansi and Kalpi on the 1st of June 1857 to 1858, Rani Lakshmi Bai and a group of Marathi rebels captured the fortress city of Gwalior from the Sikandi rulers, who were British allies. This might have reinvigorated the rebellion, but the Central Indian Field Force very quickly advanced against the city. The Rani died on the 17th of June. the second day of the Battle of Gwalior, probably killed by a carbine shot from the 8th Hussars, according to the account of 3 independent Indian representatives. The company forces captured Gwalior within the next 3 days. In descriptions of the scene of her last battle, she was compared to Joan of Arc by some commentators. Indore. Colonel Henry Durand, the then company president of Indore, had brushed away any possibility of an uprising in Indore. However, on the 1st of July, sepoys in Holkar's army revolted and opened fire on the pickets of Jaipur cavalry. When Colonel Travers broke forward to charge, Burpur cavalry refused to follow. The Burpur infantry also refused orders and instead levelled their guns at European sergeants and officers. Since all possibilities of mounting an effective deterrent were lost, Durand decided to gather up all the European residents and escape, although 39 European residents at Indore was killed. In the Punjab, what was then referred to by the British as the Punjab was a very large administration division centred on Lahore, include not only the present-day Indian and Pakistani Punjabi regions, but also the northwest frontier districts bordering Afghanistan. Much of the region had been the Sikh Empire ruled by Ranjit Singh until his death in 1839. The kingdom had been fallen into disorder, with court factions and the Kasali, the Sikh army, contending for power at Lahore Dunbar Court. After 2 Anglo-Sikh wars, the entire region was annexed by the East India Company in 1849. In 1857, the region still contained the highest number of both European and Indian troops. The inhabitants of the Punjab were not as sympathetic to the sepoys as they were elsewhere in India, which limited many of the outbreaks in the Punjab to disjointed uprising by regiments or sepoys isolated from each other. In some garrisons, notably Firozpur, indecision on the part of the senior European officers allowed the sepoys to rebel, but the sepoys then left the area, mostly heading for Delhi. At the most important garrison, that of Peshawar, close to the Afghan border, many comparatively junior officers ignored their normal commander, the elderly General Reed, and took divisive action. They intercepted the sepoys' mail, thus preventing their coordinating an uprising, and formed a force known as the Punjab Movable Column to move rapidly to suppress any revolts that occurred. When it became clear from the intercepted correspondence that some of the sepoys at Peshawar were on the point of open revolt, the 4 most disaffected Bengal native regiments were disarmed by the 2 British infantry regiments in the cantonment, backed by artillery, on the 22nd of May. This decisive act induced many local chieftains to side with the British. Jhelum in Punjab was also a centre of resistance against the British. Here 35 British soldiers of Her Majesty's 14th Regiment, South Wales Borders, died on the 7th of July 1857. To commemorate this victory, by St John's Church, Jhelum was built, and the names of those 35 British soldiers are carved on a marble lectern present at that church. The final large-scale military uprising in Punjab took place on the 9th of July, where most of a brigade of sepoys at Skeltop rebelled and began to move to Delhi. They were intercepted by John Nicholson with an equal British force as they tried to cross the Ravi River. After fighting steadily but unsuccessfully for several hours, the sepoys tried to fall back across the river but became trapped on the island. 3 days later, Nicholson annihilated the 1,100 trapped sepoys in the Battle of Trimmock Gap. Some regiments in frontier garrisons subsequently rebelled but were isolated among hostile Pachu villages and tribes. There were several mass executions amounted to several hundred of sepoys from units which rebelled or who deserted in the Punjab and northern western frontier provinces during June and July. The British had been recruiting irregular units from Sikh and Pashto communities even before the first unrest among the Bengal units, and the number of these greatly increased during the rebellion. 34,000 fresh levies eventually being raised. At one stage, faced with the need to send troops to reinforce the besiegers at Delhi, the Commissioner of the Punjab, Sir John Lawrence, suggested heading the coveted prize of Peshawar to Dost Muhammad Khan of Afghanistan in return for the pledge of friendship. The British agents in Peshawar and the adjacent districts were horrified. Referring to the massacre of a retreating British army in 1840, Herbert Enderwines wrote, quote, Dost Muhammad would not be a moral Afghan if he did not assemble or day to be gone in India and to follow after us an enemy. Europeans cannot retreat. Kabul would be again. In the event of Lord Canning insisting on Peshawar being held and Dost Muhammad, whose relations with British have been equivocal for over 30 years, remain neutral, unquote. It's in September 1858, Rah Ahmed Nawaz Khan Kural, head of the Kurur tribe, led an insurrection in the Delhi Bar district between the Sucha, Ravi and Chenab rivers. The rebellions held the jungles of Karachi and had some success against the British forces in the area, besieging Major Crawford Campbell at Kuchwantani. A squadron of Punjabi cavalry sent by Sir John Lawrence raised the siege. Ahmed Khan was killed, but the insurgents found a new leader in Mir Bahale Fatwana, who maintained the uprising for 3 months until government forces penetrated the jungle and scattered the rebels themselves. Landlords of the Rajasthani clan of Rajputs, Talaka Dobbi district, Kanpur played a prominent part in the rebellion. On hearing of the uprisings against British rule in the surrounding districts of Kanpur, Azra and Banaras, the Rajputs of Durrani organised themselves into a vast armed force and attacked the company all over the region. They also cut the company communications along the Banaras-Azra road and advanced towards the former Barani state. In the first encounter with British regular troops, the Rajputs suffered heavy losses but withdrew in order. Regrouping themselves, they made a bid to capture Banaras. In the meantime, Azwa had been besieged by another large force of rebels. The company was unable to send reinforcements to Azwajia due to the challenge posed by the Dolphi Rajputs. A clash became inevitable, and the company attacked the Rajputs with the help of the Sikhs and the Hindustani cavalry at the end of June 1857. The Rajputs were handicapped as the torrential monsoon rain soaked their supplies of gunpowder. The Rajputs, however, bitterly opposed the company advance with swords and spears and a few serviceable guns and muskets they had found. The company took about 5 miles north of Ras at a place called Prashani Anab. The Rajputs were driven back with heavy losses against the Ramari River. The British army crossed the river and sacked every Rajput village in the area. A few months later, Kunwar Singh of Janaspur district, Anara, advanced and occupied Azapuna. The Manas army sent out against him was completely defeated outside Ajwar. The company rushed reinforcements and there was a furious battle in which the Rajputs of Dari helped Kunwar Singh with their distant relative. Kunwar Singh had to withdraw and the Rajputs became the subject of cruel reprisals by the company. The leader, the Chaveri Rajput, invited to conference and treacherously arrested by the company troops, which had surrounded the place in Sajpur village in 1858. All were summarily executed by hanging from a mango tree, along with 9 of their other followers. The dead bodies were further shot with muskets and left hanging from the trees. After a few days, the bodies were taken down by the villagers and cremated. On the 25th of July, rebellion erupted in the garrison of Dinpar. The rebels quickly moved towards the city of Nara and joined by Kunwar Singh and his men. Mr. Boyle, a British railway engineer in Nara, had already prepared his house for defence against such attacks, particularly because he was a railway engineer. As the rebels approached Amra, all European residents took refuge in Boyle's house. A siege soon ensured, and 50 local sepoys defended to the use a house against artillery and musketry from the rebels. On the 29th of July, 400 men were sent out from Dinpur to relieve Anwar, but their force was ambushed by rebels around a mile away from the siege house, several defeated and driven back. On the 30th of July, Major Vincent Orr, who was going up the river with his troops and guns, reached Buxar and heard about the siege. He immediately disembarked his guns and troops, the 5th Fusiliers, and started marching towards Arrah. On the 2nd of August, some 16 miles short of Arrah, the Major was ambushed by rebels. After an intense fight, the 5th Fusiliers charged and stormed the rebel position successfully. On the 3rd of August, Major Orr and his men reached the siege house and successfully ended the siege. The aftermath. The authorities in British colonies with an Indian population, sepoy or civilian, took measures to secure themselves against copycat uprisings. In the Strait settlements and in Trinidad, the annual wholesale processions were banned. Riots broke out in the penal settlements in Burma and a settlement in Penang. The loss of a musket provoked a near riot, and security was boosted, essentially in locations with Indian convicted populations. From the end of 1857, the British had begun to gain ground again. Lucknow was retaken in March 1858. On the 8th of July 58, a peace treaty was signed and the rebellion ended. The last rebels were defeated in Gwalior in the 20th of June 1858. By 1859, rebel leaders Buck Khan and Nana Shihab had soon either been slain or had fled. The rebel murder of women, children and wounded soldiers at Kanpur and the subsequent printing of the sieges in British papers left many British soldiers seeking revenge. As well as hanging mutineers, the British had some, quote, blown from cannon, quote, which was an old Mongol punishment adopted many years before in India. Sentenced rebels were then tied over mouths of cannons and blown to pieces when the gun was fired. Most of the British press, outraged by the reports of rape and the killings of civilians and wounded soldiers, did not advocate clemency of any kind. Governor-General Canning ordered moderation in dealing with native sensibilities and earned the scornful title Clemency Canning from the press and later parts of the British public. In terms of sheer numbers, the casualties were much higher on the Indian side. A letter published after the fall of Delhi in the Bombay Telegraph was produced in British papers, testified to the scale of Indian casualties. Quote, all the cities people founded within the walls of the city of Delhi when our troops entered were bayoneted on the spot, and the number was considerable, as many may suppose, where I tell you that in some houses 40 and 50 people were hiding. These were not mutineers, but residents of the city who were trusted and well known, mild rule from pardon. I'm glad to say that they were disappointed. End quote. Edward Verber, a 19-year-old officer, recorded his experience. Quote, it was literally murder. I have seen many bloody and awful sights lately, but such as one I witnessed yesterday, I pray I never see again. The women were all spared, but their screams and seeing their husbands and sons butchered was most painful. Heaven knows I feel no pity, but when old grey-bearded men is brought and shot before our very eyes, hard must be that a man's heart, I think, cannot look upon with indifference. End quote. Some British troops adopted a policy of no prisoners. One officer, Thomas Lowe, remembered on one occasion his unit had taken 76 prisoners. They were just too tired to carry on killing and needed arrest, he later recorded. Later, after a quick trial, the prisoners were lined up with the British soldiers standing a couple of yards in front of them. On the order of fire, they all simultaneously shot, quote, swept from their earthly existence, unquote. The aftermath of the rebellion had been a focus of new work views in Indian sources and population studies. In the last Mughal, historian William Dalrymple examines the effects of the Muslim population of Delhi after the city was retaken by the British, and finds that intellectual and economic control of the city shifted from Muslim to Hindu hands because the British at that time saw an Islamic hand behind the mutiny. The scale of the punishment handed out by the British Army of retribution was considered largely appropriate and justified in the Britain shocked by reports of atrocities carried out by British and European civilians and local Christians by the rebels. Accounts of the frequently reached hyperbolic register, and according to Christopher Herbert, especially in the often repeated claim that the Red Year of 1857 marked a terrible break in British experience. Such was the atmosphere and national, quote, mood of retribution and despair, unquote, led to, quote, almost universal approval, unquote, of the measures taken to pacify the revolt. The incidents of rape committed by Indian rebels against European women and girls appalled the British public. These atrocities were often used to justify the British reaction to the rebels. British newspapers printed various eyewitness accounts of the rape of English women and girls. On such account published by the Times regarding an incident where 48 British girls as young as 10 had been raped by Indian rebels in Delhi. Karl Marx later claimed that this was a propaganda, stating that the account was written by a clergyman in Bangalore from the events of the rebellion, but produced no evidence to support this allegation. Individual incidents captured the public interest and were heavily reported to press. One such incident, that of General Wheeler's daughter Margaret, began forced to live after her captor's concubine, though this was reported in the Victorian public as Margaret killing her rapist herself. Another version of this story suggests that Margaret had been killed after her abductor had argued with his wife over her. The term sepoy or sepoyism became a derogatory term for the nationalists, especially in Ireland. Bangalore Sudha was tried for treason by a military commission assembled by Delhi and exiled to Rangoon, where he died in 1862, bringing the Mughal dynasty to an end. In 1877, Queen Victoria took the title of Empress of India on the advice of Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. The rebellion saw the end of the British East India Company rule in India. In August, by the Government of Indian Act 1858, the company was formally dissolved and its ruling powers over India was transferred to the British Crown. A new British Government Department, the Indian Office, was created to handle the governance of India, and its head, the Secretary of State for India, was entrusted with formulating an Indian policy. The Governor-General of India gained a new title, the Viceroy of India, and implemented the policies devised by the Indian Office. Some former East Indian territories, such as the Straits Settlements, became colonies in their own right. The British colonial administration embarked on a program of reform, trying to integrate Indian higher castes and rulers into the government and abolish attempts at westernization. The Viceroy stopped land grabs, decreed religious tolerance, and admitted Indians into civil service, albeit as subordinates. Essentially, the old East Indian Company bureaucracy remained, though there was a major shift in attitudes. In looking for the causes of mutiny, the authorities alighted to two things: rebellion and economy. On the rebellion, it was felt that there had been too much interference with indigenous traditions, both Hindu and Muslim. On the economy, it was not believed that the previous attempts by the company to introduce free market competition had undermined traditional power structures and bonds of loyalty, placing the peasantry at the mercy of merchants and moneylenders. In consequence, the British Raj was constructed in part around a conservative agenda based on preservation of tradition and hierarchy. On a political level, it is also felt that the previous lack of consultation between rulers and ruled had yet another significant factor in contributing to the uprising. In consequence, the Indians were drawn into government at local level, though there was a limited scale on crucial precedent which had been set with the creation of a new white-collar Indian elite. Further stimulated by the opening of universities at Calcutta, Bombay and Madras, a result of Indian Universities Act. So alongside the values of traditional and ancient India, a new professional middle class was starting to arise, in no way bound by the values of the past. Their ambition can only have been stimulated by Victoria's proclamation of November 1858, in which it is expressly stated that, quote, "We hold ourselves bound to the natives of our Indian territories by the same obligations of duty which bind us to our other subjects. It is our further will that our subjects of whatever creed or race, by freely and impartially admitted to offices in our service, the duties of which may be qualified by their education, ability and integrity duly to discharge." End quote. Acting on these sentiments, Lord Ripon, Viceroy between 1880 to 85, extended the powers of local self-government and sought to remove racial practices in the law courts by the Ilbert Bill. But a policy as such liberal and progression, as one term was revolutionary and backward, and the next creating new elites and confirming old attitudes. The Ilbert Bill only had the effect of causing a white mutiny at the end of prospect of perfect equality by law. In 1886, measures were adopted to restrict Indian entry into the civil service. The Bengal army dominated the Indian army before 1857, and a direct result after the rebellion was the scaling back of the size of the Bengali contingent in the army. The Brahmin presence in the Bengal army was reduced to the late 19th century because of their perceived primary role as mutineers. The British looked for increased recruitment in the Punjab from the Bengal army as a result of the apparent discontent that resulted in the Sepoy conflict. The rebellion transformed both the native and European armies of the British India. Of 74 regular Bengal native infantry regiments in existence at the beginning of 1857, only 12 escaped mutiny or disbandment. All 10 of the Bengal light cavalry regiments were lost. The old Bengal army had accordingly almost completely vanished from order of battle. These troops were replaced by new units recruited from castes hitherto underutilised by the British from the minority so-called martial races, such as the Sikhs and the Gurkhas. The inefficiencies of the old organisation, which had estranged sepoys from the British officers, were addressed, and the post-1857 units were mainly organised on the irregular system. Before the rebellion, each Bengal native infantry regiment had 26 British officers who held every position of authority down to the second in command of each company. In irregular units, there were few European officers who associated themselves far more closely with their soldiers, while more responsibility was given to Indian officers. The British increased the ratio of British to Indian soldiers within India. From 1861, Indian artillery was replaced by British units, except for a few mountain batteries. The post-rebellion changes formed the basis of the military organisation of British India until the earlier 20th century. Thank you for listening to Part 2, The Indian Mutiny by Brief History podcast. As always, the success of this podcast relies on you, the listener, so please listen, subscribe, share. Follow us on Twitter at BHistory Podcast. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/Brief History Podcast. Please like, share, follow, rate us on iTunes and any other podcast site. As always, thank you. My name's Andrew Knight. I'm the narrator and the writer. Harry Edmondson is the composer and the producer. Thanks for listening, and as always, further information will be found in the podcast notes. Listen out for the next episode next week.
We've got huge news from Sprint Marketing.
There's never been a better time to switch to Sprint and get the new Unlimited Plus plan. It features the TV you love with Hulu, music, streaming with Tidal Premium, Full HD, and 15 gigabytes of mobile hotspot.
Switch to Sprint's Unlimited Plus plan for just $42 per line. But hurry, for a limited time, it's now $22 per line when you bring or buy your own phones. Visit sprint.com/unlimited or call 1-800-SPRINT1.
Price with $5 per month autopay discount. One Hulu limited commercials plan per Sprint account compared to Verizon Beyond Unlimited. Features differ. Offer coverage not available everywhere. Excludes taxes, fees, and roaming. Requires new line subject to credit and $30 activation fee. Speed maximums. Use rules and restrictions apply.